Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
If you throw money at problems, you will never solve it. And that is a philosophical underpinning for what I'm going to be sharing. There's a lot of money actually pursuing ideas. People think otherwise, but there's a lot of money pursuing ideas. And we are talking about credit export. We're talking about the fintech and then the finance sectors in Africa. So there's a whole lot. But if we don't prepare our people, if we don't show them how money works, if we don't work on their mentalities, if we don't deal with the psychological barriers that keep our people poor, no amount of capital or credit can solve this problem. So I'm going to be focusing on the psychological barriers that prevent our people, that keep our people from doing well. And there's so many of them. So that's what I'm going to be talking about.
One, I'm grateful to be here. First visit to Africa and Nigeria, and so I'm excited about that. Excited to try all kinds of interesting foods and to share a few interesting ideas. And the most critical of those ideas is that, as my colleague mentioned, there's all these different aspects of credit and credit registry and fintech and so on, but none of them work well together if the psychological component isn't there, and that drives the connection between humans and the connection between leaders and members and fintechs, etc. But this connection can't happen if there's not trust. And if that connection is deep and it's meaningful, then people can build on that. And when they build upon that, then they can build something that's creative, that's innovative, that's productive, and that's profitable. And that has a cadence and ability to last for an extended period of time, to outlast all of us. I have zero interest in short-term solutions. I have significant interest in something that will outlive me.
I was here last year, so I'm happy to be back for the Africa. And part of what I realized last time is we talked a lot about how regulation and availability of credit is coming to consumers. What I'm trying to do is speaking of the trust factor, there continues to be lack of trust. You can't take more than 5 steps without hearing the word AI, and how AI can be used to actually help trust, both on the consumer side, how consumers can better understand how financial institutions are using AI to better serve their needs, and on the vice versa side, how institutions can figure out what the consumer expects using that. I mean, it's become a topic that's everywhere. So how does that fit into this industry, and how does that help create opportunities for people across the spectrum? Yeah, so one of the things we're talking about is there's a lot of fear that comes with AI, unknown, right? The unknown causes angst and uncertainty and nervousness for people. So answering some of those questions. The other thing that I'm talking about is there's a lot of data that's out there and that's being used in AI. So trying to guide people a little bit more into how some of the bigger banks across the world are using it and how that might be of value for the consumer and the banking side. I'm very excited to talk about it because it's a topic that I know that a lot of people care about.
Interestingly, someone made a comment on my LinkedIn today because I posted a story, and he says, "Oh my goodness, this is interesting that a senior citizen is this good with email marketing." Call me a senior citizen. It's good. So he said, "I'm wowed." He's a younger person. That he's a senior citizen. Is this good with email marketing and copywriting? And I said, "Guy, there's no senior citizen when it comes to success. Success has no age." I have a 95-year-old mentor. He still publishes in Amazon by himself. But we have 17-year-olds, who can't do that. So it's not age. Warren Buffett started investing, we hear, at 8, and the people who started even much younger. Elon Musk is doing incredible things in the world today. He's been all over the news since last week, a couple of days ago, that he caught a rocket launcher coming back. But he started very, very early, as early as 12. He already had the dreams of this Mars and all these things he's doing right now. So no age is cut off. What we only have to do is, for whatever audience that we are speaking to, we break it down and cut it to their understanding. If you're speaking to 3-year-olds who can communicate these subjects, AI, money, leadership, we can communicate it to 3-year-olds at their level. Then if you're talking to 40-year-olds, we speak their language, but no age is cut off.
I think that just a slightly different angle on the age. I do believe that if you allow it to be, it can separate people, much like technology. If you do it properly, you can separate people with it. You can do that with geography. You can do it with politics. You can do it with gender. You can do it with any number of things. We've gotten very good at separating one another. If we choose to use AI and technology to bring each other together, we can win. If we choose to use age to bring each other together, we can win. Otherwise, we will continue to lose, right? And I'm allergic to losing. I like winning. I'm very competitive. I like winning. And if it's required that we be together to win. So my push is that deep and meaningful connections matter. And they matter across the spectrum. How we go about doing that is complex and it's very hard work. And you have to be deeply committed, but it's possible. We have developed a model that allows people to identify where am I not connected? Where are my wobbles in my connection? And then from there, build out a roadmap how you can get better at it. If I have an issue connecting around age, well then I have to work to do, there's no magic dust, right? But if somebody gives me a roadmap, okay, if I do 3 of these, 5 of these, 12 of these, 6 times a week, then I'll get better at it. Well, I need a roadmap to help. So our job is to help. For those of us that are resistant to, don't know how, scared, living in some version of fear around technology or otherwise, then you need help. And that help can come in the form of a model or a roadmap.
Well, I think education is a big part of it, and kind of being really involved in it. Regulation is coming around, even in the US where, you know, we're from James and I, regulation is now coming about in AI. Ethical AI is becoming a much bigger thing too. Misinformation or bad actors will always be there. I think part of it would be helping people understand how they can use it in the right way and being able to siphon through things. Chaos is always going to be there, right? I mean, that's something that hasn't gone in thousands of years. So how people use it will be more and more important. And you are finding more guardrails. Part of what we do, in fact, when we work within the banking space is actually take in regulation and incorporate that into how you use it too. So it's becoming more and more important. I do want to go back just real quick on the whole age conversation, just for 1 second, because I think the issue isn't so much age, it's a mindset thing. You know, if you believe that I learn till I pass, then I'm always going to be there. And no matter how you feel about companies that are using AI like Meta or Google or Microsoft, every demographic, every age group uses it in some form of their product or not. So it's in your lives, whether you like it or not. But being able to filter through it will be more and more important.
I like the conversation around mental models, because if you can help people to play within a tested mental model, and there's so many of them, you can win no matter what the system is. Because if you look at businesses that have been around for 1,000 years, businesses that have been around for 600 years. When I did my executive coaching certification in Sarasota, which is underwater now, unfortunately, my mini thesis was on why we have companies that have such longevity in Asia and in Europe. But here, in our own climate, by the time a promoter dies, that's the end of that business. If you find businesses that have lasted for 20, 30 years, we're hailing them. But then you go to Belgium, you see Stella Artois, that's more than 650 years old. You see Cadbury, that's more than 200 years old. You see the Twinings of London, that's over 300 years old. And it's a family business, and they are doing in excess of maybe $30, $40 billion a year for 300 years. Now, when you consider that in 300 years there have been bad government, in fact, Europe 300 years ago wasn't what we see as Europe today. So there's been terrorism, there have been world wars, there have been pandemics, but these businesses have survived. Mercedes-Benz started in 1901 or thereabout. There have been 2 world wars, economic crashes, despotic leaders in Germany. They are still there. We can do it. And there are 3 pillars in the mental model that I want to share. You've got to have a driving vision. Because most of our people just start a business to eat, or maybe to pay school fees. or maybe to buy a car. People start business just to own car and to be like the Joneses. But they can't build a 300-year-old business on that vision on food. So there's got to be a compelling vision. In that mentor model, there's got to be opportunity-based that is couched in a big problem, because it's the big problem that you're solving that will determine the size of the business and the longevity. And then there's got to be systems and structures, which is what we lack in this place. Yeah, so those are the things that the ideas I would like to be sharing with our people, and also give them some bit of worksheets to help them think through that. And I hope it catches on with a couple of people, in the way so that we can kind of change the way we look at business. Because when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And to change business in this part of the world, we've got to change the way we look at it.
The one thing I would say is, if you miss it, I mean, you will continue to be sort of lost in the field of AI. The idea is to walk away with a little bit more strength and comfort in the way the world is changing. It's coming, it's here to stay. You got to wake up and accept it. So try not to miss it.
If you miss this, you're going to be condemned to the status quo. Yeah, because it means you continue to do things the way you've always done it. And they all slide into my DM every day to say we are struggling, we're not making sales in our business is collapsing. That's the status quo. So if you miss this, you are missing the very essence and these mental models we're talking about that can help you to change things. So if you miss it, sorry, status quo. Things will continue for you the way it's been.
And I think if you miss this, you will miss opportunity. Miss opportunity to be educated about AI, miss opportunity to learn systems and models, miss an opportunity to not understand that connection is important, because everyone does, but a way to do it, right? And you'll miss the opportunity to meet people that are just a step beyond, just a step before where you are, right? These connections with people that are all struggling together to make something great happen. So if you miss this, you miss an opportunity, and who wants to do that?
All right, if you for once thought, hey, am I watching Sook News TV? Is this early exchange? Of course it is. So the interview you just watched was the one had by Sook News crew with the facilitators of Africa Credit Expo 2024 that will begin tomorrow, and it's holding at the Oriental Hotel, Victoria Island, and it's starting by 9 a.m. So if you are a business person and perhaps have been thinking, where do I source credit from? Well, this is Africa Credit Expo 2024 coming your way. If you also watch the jingle that played afterwards, you would find how you could be a part of it by registering. So in the course of the show, it also display on the screen. Yes, the web address you can register through will be displayed. Moving on into the rest part of Early Exchange this beautiful Thursday morning. It's cold, but I do hope that you're not catching any of the cold. And we're here to just make it warm for you by bringing you wonderful, exciting discussions. Well, this will be very exciting for African leaders, as the IMF is looking to make it easy for countries that would need to take up loans, since it is dropping the interest on loans by 36%. But I don't run alone on this show. You know that by now. I do not like solo runs. And so Temple TC Barra, my partner in shipping policy, and of course advancing development, is very much in the studio this morning. He's tried in his own way to complement what I'm wearing. Okay, I think it's done well. Good morning, Temple.
Oh, good morning. I've got to say that it's a good day. Yeah, despite all of the things going on, you just have to be positive about it. And just to reiterate that the Africa Credit Expo 2024 starts today at 9 a.m. So the registration is on.
It's day 17.
Today is the 17th of October.
I use a different calendar.
Okay, so maybe you're from Ethiopia today. All right, so we're moving into the conversation. A lot happening in the world when it comes to the business and financial landscape. And of course, we've talked about the IMF reducing borrowing costs by 36%. And we do have a managing consultant, the CEO of Flame Academy Consulting Limited, joining us on the program here. He's standing by. He's joining us virtually. Orji Chigozie Udumezwe. That sounds very unhappy. Good morning to you, Orji.
Yeah, good morning, Temple. Always my joy to join you. The name actually is Orji Chigozie Udemezwe. Udemezwe. Yes, it sounds Abia or Hofia, like you said, but I'm an Anambra man. I'm an Nnewi man to the core. So my father gave me that name, Orji Wulu, which I shortened to Orji. So it looks like Abia State Orji. So that's okay. I'm CEO of Flame Academy Consulting Limited. And it's always my pleasure to join you. Here I'm in the city on 1,000 hills, Kigali, where we are always available to groom African leaders, conduct bespoke training for commercial banks and other world-class organizations. But I'll be in Lagos very soon, and hopefully I look forward to being in your studio live one of these days. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm sure you are doing some very lovely things in the areas of development. But Blessing, if you might permit me, maybe we'll just get into the conversation.
Of course, let's go ahead after you've done some fraternizing with your Eastern brother. I think we can progress the conversation right now. Good to see you, Orji.
Blessing, thank you so much. Always my pleasure.
All right, so here's some good news for countries, particularly those who would need some loans, as the IMF is doing something with its loans now to make it easy for countries to also repay. The IMF is lowering borrowing costs by $1.2 billion annually, so that's like a drop by 36%, and also increasing the duration threshold for countries that are members of the IMF. I said it's good news for countries that will want to take up loans, but what's that news to you?
Well, from my reading of that announcement by senior personnel of IMF, it's not actually meant to encourage new borrowers to borrow from the IMF. Of course, every country around the world, is grappling with so much debt. Most countries right now. The essence of that drop is to lessen the burden of many countries that are finding it very difficult to service their loans at this point. So what that reduction in interest rate has done is to reduce the burden currently of debt servicing by several countries that are having a big burden, managing their debt or meeting up their debt obligations. So it's not really for new borrowers to be attracted because already many countries have borrowed, beyond limits. So what IMF is doing is because of the recent rise in global interest rates due to the fight against inflation globally, connected to so many issues, including the disruptions of supply chain in oil and gas, commodities, agricultural commodities, and so on around the world since 2022, bringing high level of inflation and making central banks to try to curtail inflation by tightening monetary policy. That's raising interest rates. So with that, the interest rate on loans, which were of course existing before this time, all went up, and the burden of servicing this debt has become very crippling for so many economies. So what IMF has just done is to adjust, more like a pro-cyclical adjustment of rates downwards. So what that has done is to lessen the burden of several low-income and lowly developed economies, which many countries like Nigeria today is feeling a very tight burden in servicing debt. And due to high cost of servicing debt, many countries are finding it difficult now to run their even basic recurrent expenditure, pay salaries, personnel costs, and so on. And we find that even infrastructure has become almost, unattended to in most economies. In Nigeria today, if you would like to know, our debt service to retained revenue ratio. That is the amount of money we use to service our debt compared to how much revenue we make is currently above, for the first half of 2024, is currently above 160%. What does that mean? For example, Nigeria makes 6 trillion naira, let's say for half year, even though that's not a real figure, it's not yet up to that. But assuming that we've made 6 trillion half year, we require 10 trillion or thereabout to service our debt. I don't know if you're following me. And you find that the central bank is continually having to, issue instruments in the money market, bonds and other instruments, bond, treasury bills, and so on, to continue to raise short-term funds at a stifling rate. Today, rates are as high as 25% because the government is so much eager to borrow to be able to meet their debt obligations, to avoid a major, sovereign crisis. So what IMF has done now is to recognize the fact that several countries, like Nigeria, even though Nigeria should not be grouping itself under low-income nations, but that's the reality today. Nigeria is also having to, feel very strong pain of servicing its debt, to the point that dear President Tinubu has even recently announced the intention of government to most likely go for debt forgiveness. Another round of it after the one that we had early in the 21st century. So that's a big issue. So what IMF has done now is to reduce, the list of companies that, of countries that are likely to default in their debt repayment, to reduce that list by reducing their rate and cutting down the debt servicing requirement by, over 1.2 billion. So it's not actually a very wonderful news for those who want to borrow. It's just some kind of relief, some, reasonable relief, for those who are already heavily indebted and finding it difficult to service their debt.
Okay, you've talked about President Tinubu going for debt forgiveness. There are concerns about the potential risk of, reducing the borrowing cost, issues with the moral hazards and possibility of certain countries reliant on the International Monetary Fund. I'd like you to, speak to that. What are the potential or the possible risk associated with this reduction?
Okay, like I said, the reduction is first of all a boost, moral boost, economic boost to countries by doing what? Bringing down their debt servicing obligations. But in terms of the moral consequences, the moral hazard, and issues around adverse selections and so on in lending, my concern is that IMF, quite all right, has the duty and obligation to support nations around the world in managing, particularly monetary policy issues and market reforms and so on. But my quarrel with IMF and World Bank is that they do not as much as, pay so much attention in asking important questions to these borrowing countries as to understand how the funds that they borrow are being used in their policy management. World Bank particularly, when loans are given out and they announce, oh, it is for this kind of development, for agri, financing, or for infrastructure and so on. How much of the borrowed fund is actually applied to the project? Does IMF actually care to know and get the details? Or this borrower just come to take the money for a very good excuse or a very, very good reason, and they end up diverting these funds. And at the end of the day, they go back to World Bank and get even much more funds. And at the end of the day, the people of that nation or the whole nation, citizens of the country, will carry a very big burden on them, which continues to be transferred from one generation to the other. So IMF, World Bank, in my own view, they need to go a step further to ensure that these loans are properly vetted, and when these loans are disbursed, they are applied nearly 100% to the purpose of the loans. Not that countries can present good figures, oh, our GDP, our debt to GDP ratio is still very low, we have room for more borrowing, without looking at the effectiveness of the loan application in bringing about productivity in the country. Because if you borrow money without using it in a productive way in your economy, the money will not be able to be repaid efficiently, and the debt burden mounts, up to a point where it becomes very difficult to pay it back. People borrow money for infrastructure and they divert it for personal use and enjoyment of lodges and so on, all kinds of allowances paid to people and so on. So for me, it's immoral for a country like Nigeria to continue to borrow at a very stupendous level without trying to adjust their fiscal governance and responsibility to ensure that monies borrowed are used effectively for what they are borrowed for, and to ensure that the cost of running government is brought down. Prudence requires that if you are not making enough revenue, then you try to cut your costs, cut your expenses almost near to your level of revenue, even though we know that government always have to borrow to run their important budget. But where you have a continual budget deficit that runs into tens of percentages of your GDP, that is no more healthy looking at the future of that nation.
An analogy, using the bank situation, before the bank gives out loans, the bank ensures that this money is going for some profitable venture and there is a plan for repayment. But this is the International Monetary Fund. Lowering the interest rate, one would have thought, okay, maybe to make it easy, as you said, for the countries to repay loans. But to go further by changing some of the terms for lending. One of them is increasing the amounts and also the duration thresholds, and also making the threshold for commitment fees higher. But let's take a look at increasing the amount and duration thresholds. So they lower the interest rate and also increase the amount that can be borrowed and the duration threshold. What does that say about the IMF? Does it mean in spite of countries struggling to repay their loans, it's still a profitable venture, or this is just to help economies?
Well, the members of IMF, like Nigeria, actually make contributions towards the funds. So when they have challenges, like Nigeria will always have a challenge, or other countries, they actually have what they call the special drawing rights, the SDRs in IMF. That is more like, based on the IMF currency, the amount of funds that nations have contributed to IMF, part of which they have the right to draw when they have an emergency situation. If you remember, during the COVID time, Nigeria went to draw, part of its SDR, special drawing rights. So on that level, nations that contribute to the fund, the International Monetary Fund, several nations around the world that contribute to that fund, they have some right to draw part of their contributions or their investment in the fund. That one is not so much of a trouble going to access. But at some point, when some nations have overdrawn or have drawn to the full limit of their rights, they may need more money to solve their problems. That means they're going to draw something extra from IMF. Because why some nations come to draw their rights, many nations that are well-funded, with a large external reserve, without much challenges in their budget, maybe nations that have a surplus budget and so on, they don't draw on their rights. And those funds may be available for IMF to apply in lending to other nations. So you find that what they are doing here is to say, we recognize the fact that because of COVID that we're coming out from, and then a lot of escalations of issues here and there around the world, many nations, in Africa and so on, Kenya, Nigeria, and so on, are running more into debt. And of course, in Africa, you add the issue of moral hazard, where national presidents of African nations are not prudent in managing the economy. They just depend on running back to IMF or World Bank to go and borrow money. They're asking, how do we strengthen our fiscal structure to ensure efficient use of funds? So, by trying to reduce the interest rate, they are saying that nations can have more value by borrowing more without necessarily paying much more, so they can have more money to solve their imminent liquidity crisis. So many countries are facing very imminent liquidity crisis, which means they won't be able to meet their maturing obligations in the near term. And if that happens, there will be a crisis of confidence in the global economy, and that will not be good for anybody, whether in Asia or in America or Africa or elsewhere around the world. So it's the duty of the IMF to ensure that the global financial system is stable to a good extent. So even if the US is doing well, it's also important that Nigeria is doing well, Ghana is doing well, Brazil is doing well, Australia is doing well, so that there won't be any weak point, because they say that in a chain, a chain is as strong as its weakest point. So it is in the best interest of IMF and World Bank to ensure that every nation on earth is doing well financially, because financial crisis could be triggered, from some nation. Maybe not one weak nation, but a multiple of them going down will affect the world. US alone, running a bad economic system can affect the whole world. But other nations like emerging economies, emerging markets and developing economies, if they suffer all together, that can also affect the developed economy. So everybody needs to carry one another along. And that's why IMF is making this adjustment, one, to reduce the burden of those who are already overborrowed, and then to see how some more funds can be borrowed at relatively lower cost, giving a longer period, as you said, duration management and so on, and rate adjustment to ensure that the danger of the imminent danger of loan defaults and liquidity crisis, is stemmed before it begins to occur almost soon.
Well, OJ, I appreciate your concerns, and of course, but then the idea for me is, yes, you've put a measure in place. There's a strategy that has come up, which is a reduction of borrowing costs. But then, how sustainable is this strategy in the long run? Let's talk sustainability. Can they keep up with this?
Oh, yes. It's expected that as inflation is abating in most jurisdictions around the world, that interest rates may not likely go up in the near term. In fact, the only direction that we see interest rate going soon is on the lower level. Most times, interest rate is the price of money. So whenever there's inflation, to be able to move money out of the circulation, central banks around the world increase interest rates so that people will be incentivized to invest their money or place them in some instruments to get more price, to get more money from their investments. So so the reduction of interest rate is possibly going to be retained over time. It's a good step by IMF, and it's expected that it will continue in the foreseeable near term, because interest rates are headed downwards, by the way. Interest rates got so high that even in the US, it got to as high as 9%. And a bank crashed in 2022 due to the market risk they suffered in their holding. I'm talking about Silicon Valley Bank in this case. And several central banks in Europe, European Central Bank, Bank of England, US Federal Reserve, and several monetary authorities around the world had to move interest rates up. So as they did that, the cost of borrowing also went up. So now I think IMF is only responding to the fact that rates are now adjusting downward. So it's only normal for them to also adjust downwards. They will not act like commercial banks who usually delay in bringing rates down, but are too quick to jack rates up when monetary environment changes in their favor and so on. So IMF has only done the needful to reduce the burden of borrowing by nations. Like I said, several nations are already, delaying in their payment. They are defaulting in paying. But by bringing this interest rate down, the list of those nations that have been, almost not meeting their obligation, the list has come down a bit from the report I read. And then this will also help the remaining nations be able to service their debt without running into the issues of illiquidity.
Now, talking about the U.S. Treasury is actually calling for the IMF and World Bank to take steps to ease global liquidity strain. The IMF is in one direction, trying to make lending facilities available to countries. Are there other things that the IMF and the World Bank can do regarding the U.S. Treasury call?
Well, IMF is limited in their operations. Like I said, nations borrow what they have contributed in IMF as sovereign drawing, special drawing rights. But beyond that, they can also issue some more loans. And for World Bank, they help with, loans for developmental activities, while IMF is more focused on, some injection of funds to help countries manage their monetary policies better. More like, to stay liquid, manage inflation, and ensure market reforms so that the countries will not go into some big, leakages or burdens that do not enable the economies grow. So what IMF is doing is about the best they can do, helping countries draw more of their rights and helping raise some more money for them at reasonable rates. But then there's an extent to which they can do that. And most nations that want to run to IMF to go for financial rescue, they just can't go and get what they want. IMF require them to do some adjustments in the economies, what they call market reforms. And sometimes those reforms are situated in the context of Western economies without considering the local idiosyncrasies and issues in the local economy. That's why most times people just give a blanket rejection or blanket opposition to IMF recommendations to nations. But sometimes too, those recommendations are very good for the market to operate, properly. Sometimes they need to be tweaked a bit to adjust to the local environment in that economy. So going for IMF loan is a good thing, but it has its own backsides. And nations must be careful in doing that. And of course, Nigeria has also gone and found that it is not going to be that easy. Despite the reform we've done, we've also seen the reversal of that reform. You see the fact that earlier than now, the government had tried to bridge the gap between official and private market rate in FX. But today, what's going on now? People can still go to RDAX, the retail DAX auction, get FX at government rate of, let's say, 1,550, and they go the next second to the parallel market rate and sell 1,700 thereabouts. And that calls again for round tripping, which we thought that this government was focused on closing out. So you now find, in my own view, policy inconsistency that might also anger IMF to say, you started your reform, but you're not steadfast in pushing it through.
Okay, so a couple of minutes ago, you had talked about the fact that the IMF will do everything within its power to ensure that the United States economy doesn't, come crashing. That would also affect other world economies, right? If I had to, take a cue from that statement, I mean, what's the place of the U.S.? It feels like the U.S. and the IMF are like International Monetary Fund, and then you have a U.S. organization, on the other hand, that feels like they are going to direct, or whatever they do or decisions they do affect other countries in the world. I mean, is there a way to get out of that hold? Is it possible that, other countries may not be dependent on the U.S. economy for sustenance and survival?
Yeah, of course, several countries are strong enough on their own. But what we're discussing here, I think what your concern here is the fact that the global market is getting more and more connected. The concept of globalization, where markets are so integrated. And we must give it to the US. The United States of America has remained a world power and an economic power over the century and more. So you cannot disconnect, US from several economies around the world. Many investors in the US have spread their wings or their hands across the globe, both portfolio investors and direct investors. So you can hardly find an economy, except a few, maybe North Korea, Russia, and so on, where you don't see strong economic connect with US, or where because of strife and quarrel and global power tussle, US may not have a lot of stake in Russia, even though they are everywhere. If you go to Russia today, you find US investments, and vice versa. When you come to America, you see Russian investors too, even though with this Ukraine war, there's some kind of a divorce going on here and there. So give it to US. The US economy is one of the strongest, is still the biggest economy by real GDP in the world. So it's very large, even though it doesn't have the largest population. Okay, and you find that in most countries, US economy, has a hand, a connect there one way or the other. So if you look at the Great Depression that happened in 1929, it started from the US. The crash of their, mortgage market and the stock market. Then very recently, the 2007, 2009 global financial crisis also started from the US. Because once the market there crashes, the rest of the world will feel the pain. The United Kingdom will feel the pain. European nations will feel the pain. Asia will feel the pain. Some African countries, or many African countries too, who have been able to attract a lot of US funds, will also feel the pain. Because once US economy crashes, US investors will need to rescue the economy by selling off all their assets around the world. And when they are selling their assets around the world, and they're all looking for dollar to move back to US, you find capital flight happening in most countries back to US. Dollar becomes so strong that you can't find it because the dollar remains the single most important currency around the world. So that's why US is that strong. They have overbearing influence over IMF and World Bank. By the way, those institutions were started by them, more or less. So you cannot divorce US economy from the activities of IMF, World Bank, United Nations, Security Council, and so on, because they still contribute a whole lot in those institutions. World Bank, IMF are what they are because of strong US support. You might find a Russian, or you might find a Chinese, or you might find an Indian or whoever being the president of these organizations, but at the background, the US is still critical for their activities, for their operations, and for their good operations activities around the world. So US is critical, and you cannot discount them in considering the health of the global financial system.
Talking about easing liquidity strain, now this is a situation that many countries of the world are currently grappling with. And if the U.S. Treasury is calling on the IMF and World Bank to spearhead this, what are countries expected to do? We understand that some countries are taking measures to ease inflation and also to tackle the slow economic growth. For Nigeria, what we've seen happen, or what the central bank has done over about a year, is to try to use monetary policies to tackle inflation, attend to some economic issues. And the CBN governor recently got a commendation from the senior vice president of the World Bank Group, pointing to the 850 basis points by which interest rates have been increased over a 9-month period. What's your take on that? What more can the CBN do to ease liquidity strain?
Okay, I have said this several times, and I will never get tired of saying it. In Nigerian economy, several economic theories don't work the way they are believed to work. Despite the commendation by the IMF staff or whoever, the point remains that the jacking of interest rate in Nigeria cannot bring the so much desired result in terms of bringing inflation, controlling inflation. Because in as much as IMF might hail them for taking bold steps and tightening monetary policy, what are the consequences for the economy? What are the consequences for the manufacturing sector, for tourism sector, for agri sector, and other sectors that need to be financed, in the economy? As central bank tightens rates, lending becomes much, much more uncomfortable. It becomes very difficult to get at. And you find that lending has become very, very difficult in Nigeria. So at the end of the day, the tightening of rate might seem to be helping monetary policy, but it's damaging the economy in the sense that lending has come down. Productivity will go down, GDP will remain fragile. So for me, I've mentioned this several times that interest rate tightening cannot, altogether solve Nigeria's inflation problem. There's a fiscal element to it, and I can't, get tired of saying it. We can bring down our inflation so fast if we remove petroleum imports from our list of imported products. And a lot of agricultural products, food importation, are all part of the things that make us suffer high inflation. Can we solve the food issues through security and supply chain management and so on? Can we reduce the amount of things we import so that our demand for dollar, which causes imported inflation, can come down in this country? So no matter how much IMF praises our central bank, the point remains is that the central bank has got to a point of monetary policy exhaustion. There must be an important role by the fiscal authorities to find medium to long-term ways to solve all the pain points that bring us so much imported inflation. I might leave it at this point for now. Blessing.
All right, so since you left it at that point, let's take it a bit further to the federal government, fiscal policy, government spending.
Okay.
We've often heard this current administration talk about palliative measures. Are there other areas or the specific areas to which the government can channel its spending to boost the economy at this point?
Where is that spending coming from? That's the question. Does Nigerian government have the capacity to spend even right now? Hello?
Subsidy has been removed, and the federal government tells us that they are saving more than they would have if subsidy had remained.
All right, Blessing, let me just go to facts. I read some CBN reports recently that says that Nigerian government has been able to increase its revenue first half of 2024 to about 6 trillion compared to about 3.2 trillion that they raised similar period in 2023. Okay, so 6 trillion increase in revenue, fantastic. But it's a government that plans to spend over 20-something trillion in a year. And we're raising 6 trillion in a half of a year. And guess what? We are spending about 10 trillion to service debt half of the year. Watch that very well. We make 6 trillion as revenue, but we have needed about 10 trillion to service our debt. So where do you get money for personnel costs, for salary payments, and for infrastructure? All borrowing. We have kept issuing instruments, bonds and treasury at crazy rates to be able to hungrily raise money, which is attracting portfolio investors, giving us temporary relief in our FX market, which very soon those funds may want to go back to their destinations. So Nigeria is in big trouble. We have a very huge level of unsustainable debt. And the servicing of the debt alone gobs all of our revenue. Like I told you that our debt service to return revenue ratio is above 150% half year 2024. So there's not even any money to spend. Whatever we're spending today is just borrowed money, both to pay salary and other personnel costs, and then to manage some money in infrastructure. And our infrastructure, if you don't know, our budget for infrastructure have dropped or actual spend from about 3 trillion to about 1.something trillion half year 2024. And that is spread across different projects that can never be finished on time because of lack of funds. So we're in a big issue, a big problem. So while government should continue to find ways to do tax reforms and raise more money, why can't they also find ways to cut off a lot of unnecessary expenditure, merge some government institutions or agencies that are duplicating duties and so on, and lower down some cost of politics, cost of carrying a huge burden of aids to people that run the government, political appointees and so on. If we are not bold enough to cut down our unnecessary spending and keep only looking for how to raise our revenue, we will eventually go back again on a debt crisis that might cost this country a whole lot of our fortunes.
Oh, thank you very much, Oji Udemezue. Oji Udemezue. Yes, indeed. CEO, Flames.
Flame Academy and Consulting Limited, a foremost consulting firm. I said Flame Academy, flame, fire. Yeah. A foremost training company in Africa.
You did come with the fire this morning. We sincerely appreciate you joining us on Early Exchange. Looking forward to having you at some other time on the program. Thank you very much.
Always my pleasure. Thanks a lot, Temple.
Early Exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.